Good morning once again. I'm here in South Bend, Indiana with the author of our times, Dr. E. Michael Jones. And I'm here to talk about his book as well as some other relevant things. Dr. Jones, how have you been?
Great, just great. Good to see you, and congratulations.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. I want to talk to you about your book, your newest book. I just finished it yesterday. It's an amazing tour de force. This is a chronicle of American history you're not going to get in high school, let alone grade school or in college. This is the definitive history of America, and it is a wonderful span. Any E. Michael Jones reader will be amazed at how far he goes back in history with the names and the people, the who, why, what, and when. One of the things that stood out to me, Dr. Jones, is in your chapter about, quote, the largest single mass lynching in American history. I was surprised to learn it wasn't the Negroes from Mississippi, it was Italians. And you go into this chapter discussing the absolute animus and animosity towards the Italians, the Irish, who were not regarded as white people back then per se, but rather this intense racism. And I don't think a lot of people understood that.
Yeah. Well, it comes down to this category of white. What does it mean? I mean, to give you a Chicago Mexican example, Nick Fuentes is white when he's on the internet, but when the cops show up at his house, he announces he's a Mexican. So what we're talking about is an identity that can changes over time. So if you talk about someone like Frank Rizzo, the mayor of Philadelphia, this was at a time of intense reaction against the civil rights movement. Nixon was promoting it. Nixon got elected in 1968 as a reaction to the civil rights movement, and he's mobilizing white people. And one of the white people he's mobilizing is Frank Rizzo. Frank Rizzo was born in 1920. I guarantee you in 1920, Italians weren't white. When was the lynching? The lynching was maybe 10 years before that, sometime around that time. Italians were not white at this point. So it's a rubber yardstick. It's a flexible criterion that is based on basically approval. It's a sign of approval. When I was a young man, we used to say when someone did you a favor, you'd say, "That's mighty white of you." You know, I mean, in a sense, you're being a good person. That's what it meant, and that's what it means now. So it's a term of approval. It's not based on biology. They claim it is, but there's really, if it were based on biology, you would have clearer boundaries here because your DNA doesn't change, okay? But this is a category of the mind that gets imposed for political purposes. So in the beginning of America, we have the idea that after Bacon's Rebellion, the plantation owners in Virginia are worried about the slaves uniting, meaning the Irish slaves, the Celtic slaves, uniting with the African slaves. And so they decide to divide the workforce by saying one is white and the other is black. And white was privileged and black was not. By the time you get to Noel Ignatieff, the whole formula gets flipped over, and now black is privileged and white is not. So it's a meaningless criterion that only exists for preferential treatment, one way or the other, and it can shift back and forth.
And Doc, in reading your story, and I appreciate that as far as elaborating on that point, I get this impression right away as far as American history. These people that came from England, they were not Catholic. They were not coming over here pronouncing the name Jesus Christ, let alone Our Lady of Victory, of Our Lady of Guadalupe, or anything like that. And you do an amazing job of cataloging this history of what became this religion of America. Also, a component of that is nature worship, and it's the American wanting religion on their terms. They want to do good, but they don't want to do the sacraments. They don't have time for confession, let alone the voodoo magic of confession, it seems. They see other Catholics that are brown and yellow, and they don't want that. And there's this clear division there. And your book talks in great detail about those two components, the religion of America and the nature worship.
Yeah, well, the religion, now we're talking about the United States of America. which was an English colony, and it was populated by the most extreme Protestant sects in England at that time, namely the Puritans, the Quakers, just to name those two, who were basically kicked out of England. They couldn't survive. Everybody hated them after the English Revolution, so they come over here and they bring their understanding of the world, which is the Bible. And basically, the Bible was their operating manual. They get here, but it's a really kind of truncated, kind of idiosyncratic understanding of the Bible. Great emphasis on the Old Testament, almost exclusive emphasis on the Old Testament, and a kind of ethnic identification with the Hebrew people. The Puritans are now the new Hebrew people. America is now Canaan, and they are going to be God's chosen people, having this new land handed over to them. And once then you look at the people who are already here, or the people you don't like, and they are Amalek. And once they are Amalek, you have the right to destroy them. And that's the form of America. It was different than Canada, which was Catholic, which promoted intermarriage, and obviously Mexico, which was the cosmic race, which was basically the mestiza of the intermarriage of the Spaniards and the Native Americans. So it was different, and it had this different operating system that naturally led to conflict, racial conflict, even when there's no racial difference, as when the Puritans, when Cromwell showed up in Ireland. I mean, from a phenotypical point of view, there's no difference between the English and the Irish. The only difference is religion. And so what you have here is this dynamic of which religion becoming the form, but this weird kind of Protestant religion becoming the form of America. And all the Catholics who came here, in a sense, had to conform to that idea, one way or the other. If you want to get ahead, you got to be sort of in line with that Huntington census. And it says basically, immigrants conform to the form, and we all did that. My Irish great aunts were servants in the house of the WASP Protestants on the main line in Philadelphia, and then you move up to the point where I go to graduate school, and now I'm ready to take my role. But then you realize, hey, wait a minute, they still have the same prejudices in place here that prevent you from getting anywhere as a Catholic. So one of the things that they brought with them was the Calvinist understanding of total depravity. This is a crucial idea because of what happened to it over this period of time. It's a misinterpretation of the Bible. If you're talking about original sin, the Catholic understanding is you're wounded. You're not dead, you're wounded. Well, total depravity means you're dead. If you're dead, you're a corpse. What does that mean? It means that nature is depraved. And so you come and you've got this aggressive attitude toward nature where basically you don't have the Catholic understanding, which is that grace perfects nature, it doesn't destroy it. Well, this grace has to destroy nature because nature is totally depraved. Okay, and they realized after a generation or two, it's not working. They had to modify it, and I'm saying as they moved westward, the essence they had was Calvinism. As you move westward, you come into conflict with existence, and as Aquinas said, existence modifies essence. Existence calls forth essence. This is the new understanding of the relationship between existence and essence that came about from meditation on the fact that God created the world, which is something that Aristotle didn't know. So it modifies itself as it's moving westward, but also as it's moving forward in time, to the point where you get to the middle of the 19th century. Basically, Calvinism collapses all at once. There's that famous poem by the One-Horse Shay by Oliver Wendell Holmes. Just fell apart all at once. The one thing that united the great American literary outburst called the American Renaissance in the middle of the 19th century, Hawthorne, Melville, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, all of these great literary figures that came out of Boston. The one thing that united them was hatred of Calvinism. And so now you go 180 degrees in the opposite direction. So nature was totally depraved. Well, now nature is salvific. And the man who said that was Henry David Thoreau. Wrote the book called Walden. He set up a little cabin on Walden Pond on Emerson's property and basically said, I'm going to learn from nature. Well, you can learn from nature. This is exactly what Aquinas said, because God is the author of this existence, and so there are attributes of God. So science is a product of this, beginning with Albert the Great, the creator of science, but also art was affected by this. And Giotto started painting backgrounds to I gave up the Greek models. Vasari said he abandoned Greek models. Now we have backgrounds. Now we're situated, the gospel is situated in nature. So it was a great breakthrough. But then what they did was they took it too far. So that's true. You can learn from nature. You're right. If you just go and live on Walden Pond, you'll learn a lot of stuff. But then he says, a morning in spring is like the forgiveness of sins. Now, wait a minute. No, that's not. I love mornings in spring, but that's not what it is. The only way Thoreau knew about forgiveness of sins was because he read the Bible, because that's the only place where Jesus Christ talks about this is the new kingdom. And he commissions Peter to be the head of the church, and one of the things he has as the head of the church is the ability to forgive sins. Whose sins you shall forgive. So we're, again, confronted with the two extremes in America, because they never had the kind of Catholic middle ground. They never had the Catholic principles that allow them to understand things. So it goes from totally depraved to salvific, and they're both wrong.
Doc, and what I see, how it translated in modern times is the American, the modern man living in America, they just have this intense hostility of a rejection of going to Mass. But their Masses, every Sunday or every weekend, they go to the forest. They go to the forest, they walk their dog. It's just the dude and his dog by himself. And there's this anti-human element that's anti-connecting with other people. You just rather connect with an animal and be around forestry. And then it's just like, oh yeah, this is perfect. But this idea of self-isolation is not the way. And I think a lot of this idea of like dog and cat ownership has poisoned a lot of people and made them even more isolated, because it's like, I can't connect with other people. I don't want to connect with other people, but I can connect with this animal, even though it's not true, right? The animal doesn't love a human like the way other humans do. But this is the kind of the scene I'm picking up with a lot of people. It's just, instead of going to church, they'd rather just hang out in nature. And it's like, why don't you go take that extra leap to church? And it's just not going to happen, it seems.
No, it's not American. You have, for example, the cowboy. There is actually a cowboy church. There is a cowboy church, and it's probably based on what the story that I told, The Virginian, which is the first cowboy novel, where he goes and clearly worships nature. He's worshiping nature, which is, St. Paul talks about this in the beginning of the Epistle to Romans. That nature is so beautiful and so intricate, you can fall in and worship the nature rather than the creator of nature. And that's what they settled for. And there are people who apparently belong to the cowboy church, where you just go off. And there was a cartoon called Ricochet in the newspapers, when they had newspapers and when they had cartoons. And so they'd show the beginning of there's a cowboy cartoon, and all the people are going to church on Sunday, and the guy who's the cowboy goes off and worships nature, and they have this big picture, and that's his church. So it's a continuation of what Thoreau said, and it's a dead end, because as you said, it leads to isolation. And the cowboy, in a sense, celebrates isolation. That's what the cowboy hero is. He comes from nowhere. Nobody knows his past. He does his good deed, and then he rides off. And then they say
these are romantic storytell kind of elements. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm a cowboy. Yeah, that's right.
Another great point that I want to talk about in your book is nihilism, and it's brilliantly written. This is at your epilogue, and you write, Nihilism has led to self-destruction, which allows us to see that America's, quote, thoughtless and unqualified commitment to Israel is a suicidal symptom, end quote, that has turned the United States into the land of mass shootings, fentanyl zombies, zero religion, and denial of reality, where, quote, the primary impulse is a need for violence, end quote. Todd adds the opioid crisis to the list of pathologies currently plaguing America, without telling us, of course, that that was another Jewish project run by the Sackler family. I mean, this idea of nihilism is pervasive, especially with the advances of AI technology, and people don't know if they're actually communicating with a bot or a human. And all of this surveillance technology, people are just saying, like, they're becoming black pill, which is to say nihilistic, where they don't have hope. It seems like tomorrow may or may not come, or a nuke may come, so who cares? I'd better get in while the getting's good and cut my way through this dog-eat-dog world, exploit man. It doesn't matter because nothing matters. And this is I think you're right about that. And this is also, you see it in the manifest into road rage, right? This intense violence that goes from 0 to 60. And where's all this violence coming from, right? It's because of that nihilism. And you see it, and it comes out in cancerous ways in society.
Yeah, well, that's Emmanuel Todd's characteristic. He's the one who came up with the idea of nihilism. And also then what that leads to. He starts getting to the point where he starts talking about the Satanism that emerges from nihilism. But so what are we talking about here? Nihil means nothing, so it's you empty out the values of America. So we talked about the Protestant foundation of America, but over this period of time, they realized they were untenable. Calvinism is not tenable, and so it evaporates. And along with it, what evaporates is the moral framework that goes with religion, that in a sense has nothing to do with Puritanism, and in a sense did not necessarily have to go with the evaporation of Calvinism. If you talk about someone like Ralph Waldo Emerson, he's a Satanist when it comes to his philosophy. It's in self-reliance. He says nothing matters but the integrity of your own mind. He got that from Satan's speech in Milton. In Milton's epic, The Paradise Lost, where the devil says, the mind is its own place. And so someone says to Emerson from probably Cambridge, from Concord, from those little New England towns. Well, what if this is from the devil? And Emerson says, if it's from the devil, then I am of the devil's party. Well, this is a guy who was married to the same woman, stayed married with her. We used to see Rose Hawthorne and pat her on the head. Because the moral consensus had not evaporated. And the man who understood that, the people who understood it, were the founding fathers. Ben Franklin, I mentioned him, another archetypal American, who said, look, this religious stuff is crazy. You can't follow, they're all nuts. I'm just going to have my own religion. It's going to be moral perfection. Well, good luck on that. He knew it failed because you can't do it on your own. Okay? But the idea is a good idea. Adams said, another founding father said, we have no constitution that functions in the absence of a moral people. That was the most important thing in America. It was a moral consensus. And that's what held the country together, in spite of the fact you had 1 million or 30,000 different Protestant sects by the time we're reaching this now. And that's what collapsed after World War II. In a sense, the whole story of the American empire, let's say Third Republic begins in 1945, out of the ruins of World War II. It's basically the erosion of that moral consensus. And the main group responsible for that was the Jews. And one of the main vehicles they had was the weaponization of sexuality. So over this period of time, the Jews were constantly working to destroy obscenity laws in the United States. They started this in the 1920s when they created Hollywood. The Protestants were upset, but they couldn't stop them. The Catholics held them back for 31 years. Then the Holocaust narrative comes in and the Catholics lose their nerve because we don't want to be called Nazis. And suddenly within, let's say, 65, the pawnbroker breaking the production code, within 7 years, you have Deep Throat on main theaters in New York City. The New York Times goes, they're suddenly promoting this, and you have the collapse of the moral consensus. Well, they're the rules that structure our life. So if you don't have rules that everyone accepts, like the fact that you can't kill innocent people, which is now under assault in Gaza, again, how are you going to operate? Well, the answer is violence. It's the only thing you have. In other words, if I can't talk to you, I have to shoot you. And this is precisely what you see in places like Chicago, places like Philadelphia. You have this kind of gang warfare now, and violence is the only way that you can do this. So with the evaporation of the form, with the evaporation of Protestantism and Protestantism's support of the moral order, the vacuum has to be filled by violence. It's that simple.
And then, of course, it comes into it degenerates into the barbaric conclusion that might is right when we know that that's not the true. And another thing about your book, Can't Stop Talking About, is I'm glad that you brought up Hemingway. And I'm glad that you brought up details about Clint Eastwood, particularly the abortions. And Hemingway being this figure, there's a bar in Chicago that celebrates Hemingway. It's, about booze and probably some animals and stuff on the wall there. But you do a great job of saying, okay, this is clearly a tough guy. Hemingway go through 2 world wars, but he committed a war crime. And then this idea of just like, oh yeah, I'm a big tough guy with these shotguns and I go hunting and I'm so tough. But what about these marriages? Is adultery a quality that makes a man heroic or admirable? I don't think so. And you bring that up. You bring up these details about Clint Eastwood and this, like, again, this figure, but he's this intense womanizer, right? From back in the day. And it's like, you see how these things, this lifestyles changed them and affected them profoundly for the rest of their lives, with Hemingway killing himself and Clint Eastwood saying that the abortion thing was one of the worst things that ever happened to him.
Yeah. I think Hemingway was a powerful influence as an American icon. For me, growing up, when I went to Europe, it was 50 years after Hemingway had gone to Europe, but there was still that form there. I showed up in the same way. I had a wife and a small child. He had a wife and a small child, and the fundamental issue is, are you going to follow through on what you said? And I did, and he didn't. And because he didn't, he had this weakness. And because he had this weakness, he had to compensate by being the macho guy. And so this was, in many ways, he was the paradigm that gave identity to a group of people during a great transition in American history, which was by, I think it was 1910, let's say 1900, 80% of the population is working on farms and 20% are working in offices. By 1920 something, by the end of the 1920s, it was completely reversed. 80% of the people were working in offices and 20% are on the farms. And they have these skills that don't mean anything anymore, that were crucial to their understanding of them as men, a masculine identity. Like the gun. The gun has always been a symbol of American masculinity. And it's from Daniel Boone. I mean, the picture there, Daniel Boone is the classic example of what I'm talking about. He was born into Quaker religion. Well, Quakers are pacifists. But he wants to go through the Cumberland Gap and lead people into Kentucky. Well, you got to pick up a gun. Well, at that point, you're no longer a Quaker. And so existence modified essence. And we have the same thing here with Hemingway. A crucial moment here is basically every single tree in Michigan was cut down. And he shows up there when it's cut down. You know, he was born in 1899. He's going as a teenager. You can go to a bar in Petoskey, by the way, where he actually stood. You can stand where Hemingway stood at the bar and have a drink on his way to doing trout fishing in the big Two-Hearted River. It was all logged out and burned out. And so this is Puritan nature. It was depraved. We took care of it. We logged it all out. We made money on it. And he's wondering, where is my identity? What am I? I'm going to be this aggressive, masculine guy to disguise the fact that I'm a very weak guy. I can't control my passions. Wrecked my first marriage. Felt guilty about it and tried to anesthetize the guilt by drinking, which is pretty much the story of, he admitted it. He was, I'm a jerk. I dumped my first wife. I shouldn't have done it. And he had a style that he confected with the collaboration of Ezra Pound that was kind of stripped down. It was modern. It was tough guy. It was American. And it had a big effect on American identity.
And it's funny that you also bring up about the Two-Hearted. There's actually a Bell's Brewing Company. They do beer, and they actually named, because they were inspired by Hemingway, a beer called Two-Hearted Ale. And it's got 2 pictures of trout on there. It's pretty good, but it's interesting. I connected. I'm like, where did they come up with Two-Hearted? Well, they come up with
Two-Hearted River. If there's one thing that's going to save Michigan, it's breweries. Microbreweries are going to save Michigan. They don't make cars. They won't make cars, but they'll make beer. Yeah. And beer is important because, as A.E. Housman says, malt does more than Milton can to justify God's ways to man.
I like that. I'm going to have to chew on that one for a little bit. Doc,
I proposed this to a guy who was going to build a brewery, and as soon as he heard it, he said, I'm going to paint that on the wall of my brewery.
Okay, I like that. Doc, another reason your listeners need to also listen to you is because of these books that you recommend. I'm picking up The Big Test by Nicholas Lehman. You've spoke about this before, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think another division tactic of America inadvertently has become this monster, which is IQ testing, right? You got your low IQ because of your skin color.
Did you know, by the way, that the average IQ of a Haitian is 75? Did you know that?
Of course, the IQ.
When was the last time they gave Haitians an IQ test?
Yeah.
And secondly, what language did they give it in?
Yeah, yeah.
It's a very special language there. It's kind of French, but it's very this is part of the preposterous claims that you can see every day on the internet. Every day you can find this on the internet.
Oh yeah, and I bring this up because the IQ testing began in a period long dead in America, which is like, okay, these prep guys who got the luxury of being from rich families over in Boston or whatever in New England. And they went to private schools that would prep them for these Ivy League schools like Yale or Harvard. This is a different breed of person back then compared to what testing is now, where you had some people who did not have that advantage. Typically, a lot of Black and Latino people and a lot of people with broken families. And these characters in these stories, they bring out that when this rich family adopts this Black girl, and the Black girl, they live on one side of the city, and then they go to the other side of the city where the rich people is, and the Black girl who's adopted right away sees, well, not only are these people spoiled rich, but their women have husbands. And it goes back to the idea that's so often overlooked and the critical, which is the war on the family that has been going on, but how important it is. But a lot of people don't see that. And a lot of people are quick to weaponize IQ tests instead of discussing the real family issues, which is, where is the father? Is he working? And is he involved in that family's life as a husband and raising the kids? But we don't want to talk about that. We just want to talk about low IQ people.
Yeah, so race was the fundamental issue in a state church. It was the fundamental issue in America. But then by the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, everybody had to talk about science. So basically the goal was to come with some type of racial criterion that would eliminate certain people. And now you have to do scientific proof of it. So you came up with the Stanford-Binet test, which created the term IQ. Okay. Now, what happens is, if there is a difference between, let's say, blacks on the south side of Chicago and whites on the north side of Chicago. It turns out if you separate this out according to family structure, the racial differential disappears. So the crucial issue here is family structure, as you said. And the crucial problem of black migration from Mississippi to Chicago during the 1950s and 60s was the disintegration of the family. Immigration always causes moral problems because most people act not because they're moral theologians, but because of custom. You come from a place where you act in a certain way and you don't think about it. You just do it. I mean, my attitude toward marriage when I was 20 years old, when I got married when I was 21, was pretty much formed by custom. It's something that you did when you were that age. When you move and when you're an immigrant, the customs change. And then the question is, does the morality change with the customs? Well, I don't know. I'm not a moral theologian. I'm looking around. I saw this when I was in Germany. I went to Berlin and I'm living there with Palestinians and Arabs. Well, they were just swept away because from their point of view, all the German women were whores. And to be honest, they did, they earned that reputation at that period of time. They came from a place where you weren't allowed to drink. There's nothing but bars all around them in Berlin. And they're swept away by this thing. They get involved sexually with them. They're angry. And as a result, they take the anger out on me when I show up there, because I'm an American and they don't like the way Americans support Israel, blah, 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 the whole thing. But it's a classic example of losing your moral compass because you move to a different place. That's a classic story of what happens to Americans. And it happens to the blacks on the south side of Chicago. The only reason that it didn't happen across the board was because of the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church was allowed to create ethnic parishes at this time. And the ethnic parish preserved the moral framework that Catholics brought over with them, while at the same time allowing the people to integrate into this country. But I mentioned Dagger John Hughes there, the Archbishop of New York. He told the Irish, don't move. Don't leave New York. Stay in New York. Do not follow these people west, because if you do, you'll become a Protestant by the time you end up in Indiana. And there was an element of truth to that. The Germans were a little bit different because they had agricultural communities, places like Minnesota, but for the most part, the Irish remained in New York City.
I appreciate that. And I think what you see, another consequence of this IQ testing that has become, this for so long has been claimed to be this nonprofit entity, that's BS. It's been for profit. And wait a minute, who voted for this? Nobody voted for this mass IQ system that is deeply flawed to just do it. Do things the way that it's going to be happening for American society. Nobody voted for it. Nobody asked for it. Maybe to some degree, to some collegiate and academic stuff, but outside of that, nobody asked for it. Nobody approved for it. And there was no grand vote. And what's also terrible is once people's money and reputations got on the line, it became, quote unquote, too big to fail. So now we had like this disgusting, slouching, dead mechanism that we're all forced to do and have been doing. Got to do those ACT tests, those SAT tests. And if you don't do good, guess what? You're going to be a blue collar worker or something like that, something ridiculous. And the stigma of these tests of young people, it's just like, oh, you got a 2? Well, guess what? A monkey got higher than you. You're a monkey smarter than you. And so this idea had terrible consequences that you keep seeing to this day. And the radix malorum of it all, the author does a great job. Listen to this. He says, our apparatus of meritocracy is not part of this tradition. Rather, it belongs to an older, less distinctively American tradition of using tests in education to select a small governing elite. The founders of the American meritocracy were not supporters of an expanded opportunity-oriented, and they were certainly not the originators of the idea of equal opportunity. They did, however, believe that they were destroying a nascent class class system and building a fluid, mobile society. In retrospect, this was vainglorious. You can't undermine social rank by setting up an elaborate process of ranking.
Okay, you made a good point here. After World War II, you had the experience of the mobilization of 13 million soldiers. They had to be assigned something or other, some job to do, and they gave them standardized tests. Before this time, if you wanted to go to Harvard, you had to go to a prep school, you had to be part of that ethnic group, and you had to go to Harvard, and you had to talk and write to the professor. After this time, it's a standardized test because we are going to mobilize as the American empire, and that's going to be the criterion. So when I'm in high school, we're confronted with this phenomenon. So I won, when I was a senior, I won the English medal and the social studies medal at a prep school, one of two prep schools where the smartest Catholics in Philadelphia went. At this point, somebody that we never heard of, who really didn't do much, contribute much, suddenly gets 1,400 or 1,500 on his SATs. Well, this immediately trumped everything that we had in school. In other words, this is a totally alien type of criterion, okay, that basically makes everything that your school stood for, everything that you held among your peers as important, just threw it out the window. And suddenly this guy's a secret genius. Well, now wait a minute. Now what we're talking about here is they're selecting out for people who are standardized, who are good at taking standardized tests. Not people who are good at speaking. Now, I never took a standardized test after I took that, but every day I'm doing what I'm doing now. I'm speaking and I'm writing, which is a good indication of how you're going to do for the rest of your life, because it's basically speaking and writing. All this was completely thrown out the window, and now, in a sense, you have these outsiders telling you what to do. The other side of the coin is it was really easy to cheat on this test. And Lemon brings this out, and one of the great achievements of this book is basically to talk about the Kaplan prep course in Brooklyn. Now, the dumb goyim in Princeton never changed the test. They never changed the questions. And so Kaplan used to have a prep course, and he'd have a party afterwards, and he'd invite the students back. And the criterion to get in the party was, tell me one question. So by within 2 years or so, he knew every question on the SAT. That meant that the Jews who took his course in Brooklyn all got 1,600, which means they all got into Harvard, and then they took over Harvard. When my son was in Harvard at Harvard from 1989 to 1992 when he graduated, and the discussion then was, are the Jews taking over Harvard? That was then. Well, we know the answer to that question now because Claudine Gay, when she tried to stand up to the big Jew donors at Harvard, she got fired because she wanted to stand up for freedom of speech. So what it led naturally to the takeover, the oligarchic takeover of the United States of America by taking over the premier elite educational institutions.
You brought up about the cheating scandal. Flash forward to today, not too much has changed because guess what? The headlines are now reading that the whole education system is broken. People are using ChatGPT to pass and fake their way through college, and the professors are using ChatGPT to grade their paperwork. So the whole thing is busted, and it's coming out. And what's worse is it has severe consequences on people of my generation, and not limited to my generation. Roosh, our friend Roosh from American Pilgrim, I hope he's doing well. You know, he writes, as a social consequence, he writes, this is the big scam of life in the United States. First, you're pushed into university to get a degree that saddles you with a high amount of debt, but which gives you only a narrow range of skills. After you graduate, who is going to employ you for those skills? A corporation in the city, and that city will have a metropolitan population of 1 million or more. Then you go to a city with your new job. You're ready to start your life, but you'll succumb to temptation. You'll drink, fornicate, experiment with drugs, become addicted to entertainment, or anything nothing else in the world that can provide you with this temporary joy. And you see this, and I've seen it happen to me. I've seen it happen to my friends as you get put into these cities, right? These energy harvesting places, and then you're in this world of, you're in the belly of the beast. It's like, well, I'm here for education, but at the same time, there's a world of decadence and temptation that's right there to snatch you. And good luck to you, because the temptation is there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, well, the other thing that ChatGPT or AI has done is it's destroyed education. Because the main criterion, at least in liberal arts education, was writing an essay. If you could write the essay, well, then that was it. That was pretty much all you had to do, because you could formulate, synthesize the ideas, formulate. Well, now you can download an essay on anything. So basically what you'd have to do in order to maintain the liberal arts standard was go back to the blue book and the number 2 pencil. And basically stand there, hand out the blue book, say, here is the essay question, you write it down, and I'm going to watch you. No computers are allowed in this room. So this has conspired to basically wreck what I thought was a good education. We already talked about Milton's Paradise Lost. There are some ideas, important ideas, that you can only get through literature. And Milton's Satan's speech and Milton's Paradise Lost is one of these really important ideas, because it was one of the foundational principles of American identity. And so what happened over this period of time is they destroyed literary studies. It became politically correct. You had to be a feminist in order to get into the English department. The feminists taught introductory composition. Everybody hated feminist composition teachers. They vowed never to take a literature course again. The price kept going up to the point where the only way you could make education pay was to become a lawyer or a doctor, like pre-med, which means the destruction of all of these majors in literary history, things like that. It's destroyed it, and I don't know how they're going to get it back again.
I don't know either. Don't know, Doc, but I do want to transition to one of my favorite things that of yours when you talk about topics is beauty. And I want to transition to beauty, and I thought it would be fun for a lot of viewers. Let's hear what beauty, as far as interpreted by Andy Warhol, and your thoughts. I'm going to read some quotes from you, from him, and let me know what you think. You've got this great, wonderful chapter on, of course, the whole book on the dangers of beauty. Read it if you haven't already. Okay, let's hear what Andy Warhol has to say about beauty. He writes this: during the 60s, a lot of people I knew seemed to think that underarm smell was attractive. They never seemed to be wearing anything washable. Everything always had to be dry cleaned, the satins, the sewn-on mirrors, the velvets. The problem was that it was never dry cleaned. And then it got worse, and everybody started wearing suedes and leathers, and those really never got cleaned. I admit to having worn suede and leather pants myself for a while, but you just never feel clean, and it's degenerate anyway to wear animal skins unless it's to keep yourself warm. I'll never understand why they haven't invented something yet that's as warm as fur. So I went back to blue jeans after that degenerate period, very happily. Blue jeans wind up being the cleanest thing you can wear because it's their nature to be washed a lot. And they're so American in essence. How about that? I've never heard this from Andy Warhol. So who is Andy Warhol? His name is Warhola. He's a Czechoslovakian.
He's a Catholic from Pittsburgh who shows up in New York at a time when we were in a crucial transitional moment. And the crucial transitional moment was basically the dealers had taken over the art world. And so the man who created Picasso, the man who did it, was a German Jew who showed up in Paris in 1907 and basically put Picasso together with Braque, the same time that Picasso did Les Dames d'Avignon, and created this dance craze called Cubism. And so it was a new movement, and sold a lot of paintings. Now, this is a time when people look at the painting and say, gee, that doesn't look like great art to me. And the guy would take them aside and say, look, if you buy this now, I guarantee you it will be worth this much in the future. The man who understood this, did it already, was Albert Barnes with Impressionism, which people did like. He bought it, got in on the ground floor, and ended up being worth having a collection worth a couple $1 billion by the time it was looted. So this is what they understood. In modern art, it became the invention of the dealer, and he was engaging in something called insider trading. The man who did it to Andy Warhol was a Jew by the name of Leo Castelli. It's got an Italian name, but he was really a Jew. He got in at the same time that into this at the same time that the CIA had started promoting abstract expressionism, and the famous guy was Jackson Pollock. Time magazine called him Jack the Dripper, because he basically have cans of paint, punch holes in them, and then kind of drip it on the canvas. Okay, and the man who made him was Nelson Rockefeller, who bought up these things, huge paintings, and put them on the wall of the Chase Manhattan Bank. And everybody thought, well, I don't understand it at all, but if Nelson Rockefeller is putting it on the bank, it must be, well, that was the real symbolism here. In other words, if you bought this at a certain period of time, no matter what it looks like, at a certain period after that, it was worth a lot of money. And so it became insider trading. That's what it was. And Castelli comes in just as abstract expressionism is sort of dying down, comes in exactly at that moment, like 1947, the moment when Pietro Annigoni, one of the greatest portrait painters in the tradition of Italian art, the greatest tradition in the world, does an exhibition and nobody shows up. Not one person shows up at an exhibit because everybody's buying Wall Eaters by Jackson Pollock. Okay? At this point, Castelli flips the narrative and goes from completely unrealistic, like no mimesis whatsoever, to hyper-mimesis, which is basically a Campbell soup can and a Brillo box. This is not, art is imitation of nature. Art is not reproduction of an artifact. It's not that. But that's what Andy Warhol got involved in. I don't know whether he had any talent whatsoever. I don't know, and we'll never know, because it takes no talent whatsoever to produce a Brillo box, because the artist is not important at this point. The dealer is important, and the dealer can guarantee the guy who buys your Brillo box that it will be worth X amount more than you paid for it at that time. This is the whole corruption of art that took place in New York City after World War II.
When I hear that, it makes me think of these expressions and these thoughts that came into mind. The medium is the medium. The medium is the medium. And then you always say...
The medium is the message? Is that what you're saying?
I think so.
That was McLuhan said that.
Thank
you.
The
medium is the message.
That's what it makes me think of. And it also makes me think of, I know you always say truth is an opinion of the powerful. So it was to go to show that beauty is the opinion of the powerful,
that's
right?
I don't believe the truth is the opinion of the powerful, but Thrasymachus did when he got into the argument with Socrates. And that's always been the sophistic argument. And so you're right. Beauty is the opinion of the powerful. Truth and beauty are really transcendentalists, but when you get down to this point, beauty is the opinion of the powerful, and that's the way to make money.
There it is. It's about making money. Here's another one. Here's another quote by our friend Andy Warhol on beauty. He says, "I know good cooks who will spend days finding fresh garlic and fresh basil and fresh tarragon, etc., and then use canned tomatoes for the sauce, saying it doesn't matter. But I know it does matter." Thought that was interesting. Here's another one. Everybody's sense of beauty is different from everybody else's. When I see people dressed in hideous clothes that look all wrong on them, I try to imagine the moment they were buying them and thought, this is great. I like it. I'll take it. You can't imagine what went off in their heads to make them buy those maroon polyester waffle iron pants or that acrylic halter top that has Miami written in glitter. You wonder what they rejected as not beautiful. An acrylic halter top that had Chicago? Anyway.
Well, this is part of the disintegration of aesthetics at this point, because he's basically saying that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which is not the thesis of the dangers of beauty. Beauty is an objective aspect of the object itself. Obviously, it has to be perceived in order to be seen as beauty, but the perceiver sees something objective there that is beautiful. And the formula for beauty would be unity in multeity, which is how Coleridge articulate. One of the great underrated philosophical thinkers in England. I know that's an oxymoron, but I mean, he was as good as it gets, and his aesthetics were as good as, that was the best thing he ever wrote. So unity and multeity is the objective criterion of beauty, and it's identifiable in a way that eliminates the subjectivity when you say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which is what Warhol is saying here. And he's obviously operating from that principle, because did he ever say that the Brillo can, the Brillo box or the Campbell soup can was beautiful? I don't think he ever was that stupid. You know, he knew it was a game. He was kind of winking at you. You know, we're on the inside, what was going on here. But he never dealt with the issue of beauty because he couldn't produce it. He didn't know how to do it. He was a con man. And he was working with Castelli, who was the bigger con man.
Yeah, they turned art and then they kind of just made it into this commercial product, right? This commercial art. But it's interesting as far as the way his mind worked and everything. That's why I picked up his book or whatever, and the differences. Of course, you bring up your book and then on The Dangers of Beauty, which of course you reference Jack Maritain as far as the wisdom there, which is also relevant. And you're right. And it's this idea of this is why you also talk about the greenhouse, the architect brothers, and your descriptions. And I wish maybe look on YouTube at the greenhouse that you've been to in California, and you see it. The elements from Japanese architecture, but local redwood trees from California, all these different things, and putting them together, this multi-aity that leads to unity, which is, when it's multi-aity that's unified, that is beautiful. And this is what, again, why you bring up like this architecture from the Green Brothers.
Yeah, I think that the America was the unifying factor here.
Okay.
It was the unifying factor. This was a uniquely American form of architecture that came into existence the way America came into existence, with the confrontation with existence. So Green, on his way back from San Francisco, stopped at Carmel. There was an artist colony there. A guy came up to him and said, "I just bought a property. I'd like you to build a house on the property." It was on this bluff over the Pacific Ocean in Carmel Highlands, just south of Carmel. Beautiful location. And what did Green do? He could have built a Greek temple there. It would have been a beautiful, for sure, beautiful Greek temple, but that's not what he did. That's Platonic. This is Thomistic here. So he sat there and waited for the form to emerge out of the environment, out of the landscape. And that's what he did. And so basically, it's unlike the Gamble House in Pasadena. That's a lot of redwood. There's not one stick of redwood in this house because this is stone. This is a bluff, and he got the stone from a local quarry. Brought it there, and then watched each brick being put in place. And you have this kind of seamless transition, especially when you look down at the canyon right next to it. You look up, and there's kind of like this seamless transition from nature to culture, which is this totally new American form of architecture that was a great breakthrough and an example of existence calling a new essence into being.
Love it, Dr. Jones. Love it, Dr. Jones. I know we're running out of time. I want to mention one more thing. So I promised one of my YouTube channel, I'd ask them a question on behalf of them. So here's a random curveball here for you. I know in the Bible it talks about giants. I do think that giants existed back in the day, but I don't think dinosaurs existed. What are your thoughts?
I think they existed.
Okay.
I don't think there's any doubt that they existed. The question is, well, when did they exist? And I think that we're at a point now where we have two irreconcilable time frames. Okay, there's the time frame of the Bible, the 6,000-year time frame, and there's the geologic Agassiz time frame, which goes to millions of years. All I can say is that we don't. No, I can't reconcile them. I can't reconcile them, and I don't think that the Catholic position is, if you want to understand Genesis, you're talking about poetry in a language that existed a long time ago, where they were talking about their understanding of the world. And so I don't think it's a geology textbook. If you want, I don't think the church considers it a geology textbook, but the fundamental fact, essence of Genesis is in the first sentence, which is, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. That's absolutely true. And that is a statement that changed the world, because Plato and Aristotle did not know there was a beginning. They didn't know that there was a creation. They thought the world was eternal. And because it was eternal, they thought it was divine, which led to pantheism. And the man who broke this up was Aquinas, when he wrote De Aetate Mundi Contra Murmurantes. And he said, even if the world is eternal, it had to come into being. Now that is a really subtle thought. And only somebody like Aquinas could have articulated it for the first time. And that's the type of understanding that we have to bring to Genesis when we're trying to articulate what Genesis knew, what the author of Genesis knew, and what we know by studying, the fossil record.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. That's going to do it. I want to say, before we go, I want to say thank you to Mike. Thank you to Dr. E. Michael Jones. Support Dr. Jones's work. Read his book. And make sure you read this, right? Less scrolling, read. Read more. And then talk about it. Subscribe to Culture Wars magazine every month. You get this wonderful magazine. So go to culturewars.com and you can get order it from there. Get all his books at fidelitypress.org. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. I've got this Substack channel going. If you want to share with my writing, where I write about Dr. Jones's book, so I could use your support there. Thank you very much for watching. Dr. Jones, the last word for us.
Yeah, stop scrolling, start reading. Thanks for this interview.
Thank you.
Thanks for elevating the level of discourse.
Thank you.